The front door creaked open just as the sun dipped behind the dogwood trees lining Greenville's quiet Maple Street. A gust of cool March air slipped inside, rustling the edge of the newspaper spread open on the coffee table. Frank Delaney looked up from his recliner glasses slipping slightly down the bridge of his nose and barely had time to set down his mug before the whirlwind arrived. "Dad, I'm engaged." Rachel's voice, bright, breathless, full of life, filled the room like a bell in springtime. She practically danced into the living room, cheeks pink from the cold, her cardigan flapping open like she'd forgotten to button it in her rush. Frank stood slowly, his joints stiff from the quiet stillness of late afternoon. "Come again." She thrust her left hand forward, and there it was, a diamond ring, modest but catching the golden light from the lamp beside his chair. Her hand trembled slightly, not from cold, but from the kind of excitement that comes once in a lifetime. Frank smiled, warmth rising in his chest as he reached to hug her. "Rachel, sweet girl, when did this happen?" "Just now," she beamed. "Chase picked me up from school and drove to that big oak tree in Falls Park, remember? The one we had our picnic under when I graduated college." Frank nodded, remembering the sweat-stained blanket, the homemade sandwiches, and how proud Elaine had looked. "He got down on one knee right there," Rachel continued, "and he said I made him believe in something real again." She laughed, tears in her eyes. "Dad, it was perfect." Frank pulled her close again, burying his nose briefly in her red curls. She smelled like lavender and coffee, her usual. And joy. She smelled like joy. When they sat down, Rachel still had that sparkle about her, like the ring had spread its light through her whole body. Frank picked up his glasses and said, "Let me see him." She was already pulling out her phone. "Here, this is his profile pic, Chase Aldridge. He just updated it last week." Frank took the phone, peering at the photo. Young man, mid-30s, dressed in a tailored navy suit. Confident posture, bright white smile hair that looked like it cost more than Frank's last pair of shoes. But it wasn't the suit or the smile that made Frank's gut tighten, it was the name. Aldridge. Like a cold wind through a closed window, the past slid in. Frank's mind shifted gears, no longer the proud father, but the silent architect behind Delaney Holdings, a multi-state business network that had once tangled quietly and bitterly with the Aldridge family. Land deals, lawsuits, corruption probes. The Aldridges had walked away cleaner than they deserved. Frank had never forgotten. Rachel had no idea. To her, he was just dad, retired lineman. Social Security lived simply after Mom passed. No hint of the man who still held quiet meetings in back rooms and signed deals that shaped small towns. He handed the phone back. "What do you think?" she asked, a note of vulnerability now surfacing beneath her joy. Frank's fingers intertwined slowly. He didn't want to ruin this moment, but something sharp pressed against his chest. "Rachel," he said gently, "are you sure this family—" Her brows furrowed. "What do you mean?" He hesitated. "Aldridge. The name carries history. The company scandals a few years back. Their son's DUI that vanished from court. Your mother and I followed that news closely." Rachel pulled back, her eyes clouding. "You don't know him, Dad. That's not fair. I just want you to be protected like I need saving." Her voice cracked. Frank blinked. He hadn't heard that tone from her since she was 15 and refused to quit the high school art club even when it meant missing after-school tutoring. "Chase loves me," she said. "He could have had anyone, trust fund girls, socialites, but he wants me, a public school teacher who still packs her own lunch." Frank stood. "I didn't mean—" "Yes, you did," she said. "You looked at one photo and decided he wasn't good enough. No, I looked at one name and remembered all the things I've spent a lifetime trying to protect you from." Rachel's lips quivered. She stood abruptly, snatching her purse. "I thought you'd be happy for me. I thought maybe just this once you'd see me as something more than your little girl who always needs protecting." "Rachel, I don't want your opinion if it's wrapped in judgment." Her voice was shaking now. "You didn't even ask how he treats me. You just assumed." Frank's throat tightened as she walked to the door, heels clicking sharply on the hardwood. She turned briefly. "Chase makes me feel like I matter, like I'm worth something. You've always been worth something," he whispered. But the door clicked shut behind her. Frank stood alone in the dim light, the ring of silence louder than any slam could have been. The old mantel clock ticked behind him, steady and indifferent. He looked at the photo of Elaine on the shelf, wedding day veil, fluttering eyes full of a wisdom that had always seen deeper than he could. He picked it up, ran a thumb along the edge. "What would you have said?" he murmured. "Would you have smiled and waited, or told her what you knew?" But he already knew the answer. Elaine would have invited Chase to dinner, asked him questions, observed, quietly, kindly. Frank rubbed a hand across his face. He wasn't Elaine. He was a man who saw traps before they snapped shut, who built firewalls around the people he loved. He sat back down, hands folded, heart heavy. He'd seen too much in his life to ignore what the name Aldridge could mean. Frank Delaney stood over the stove, carefully ladling gravy onto the pot roast, letting the steam rise and coat his glasses before wiping them with the corner of a dish towel. The kitchen was filled with the rich, slow-cooked scent of beef carrots and rosemary, a Sunday tradition moved to Thursday by necessity. Tonight wasn't about food. It was about character. He checked the dining table once more. Mismatched placemats, cloth napkins, not the fancy kind, just the ones Elaine had sewn when Rachel was still in pigtails. No centerpiece, no candles, just honest, plain hospitality. At exactly 6:28 p.m., headlights swept across the living room curtains. Frank exhaled slowly. Showtime. Rachel came in first, cheeks flushed with excitement, holding a bottle of wine in both hands like it was a trophy. "Dad, we brought you a Cabernet." Chase Aldridge followed, tall and smooth in a camel-colored coat over a dark turtleneck. His hair was perfectly in place, his handshake firm but fleeting, like someone who believed longer contact implied neediness. "Mr. Delaney," Chase said with a grin. "I've heard a lot about you." Frank nodded. "Hope it wasn't all bad." Rachel giggled, placing the wine on the counter. "He's teasing Chase." Frank motioned to the table. "Dinner's ready. Let's sit." They made small talk as they served themselves. School updates, real estate trends, gas prices. Chase answered questions with ease, dropping just enough humility to seem grounded but always circling back to his job, his vision, his network. "This pot roast is amazing," Chase said between bites. "Like real down-home comfort food. Reminds me of my nanny's cooking when I was a kid." Frank raised an eyebrow. "Nanny, huh?" Rachel jumped in. "He means the housekeeper who helped raise him. Maria, right?" Maria. Chase nodded. "Salt of the earth. From Guatemala, I think." Frank cut a piece of roast. "You think?" Chase smiled, missing the point. "It was a long time ago." Frank leaned back. "So, Chase, what is it you do again?" "Private equity," Chase said, wiping his mouth, "focused on growth stage acquisitions. Mostly clean energy right now, but I keep my eye on real estate portfolios too." Frank nodded slowly, though inside he was already ticking off red flags. Confidence too polished, language too practiced. Rachel reached for more bread. "Chase just helped close a deal in Charleston last month. He's really good at what he does, Dad." "I'm sure he is," Frank said. "Aldridge's name goes far in the South." There was a slight pause. Chase's smile stayed, but his eyes narrowed just slightly, like a man who had finally picked up the game beneath the table. "Yeah," he said, "it opens some doors, but also some expectations." "You know," Frank said nothing. Rachel looked between them, trying to smooth things. "We're thinking of getting a place in downtown Greenville after the wedding, a condo near the park." Chase nodded. "Your daughter deserves the best, Mr. Delaney. I intend to give it to her." Frank sipped water. "And what does the best mean to you exactly?" Chase grinned, leaning back. "Comfort. Security. Options. She won't have to budget every month or skip a dentist appointment just to fix her car." Frank set his glass down. Rachel laughed lightly, as if trying to diffuse something she couldn't quite name. "He's just saying we won't have to worry so much anymore." Frank's voice stayed even. "We've never worried. We managed fine." Chase tilted his head. "Of course. I just meant, well, you know, some people settle because they have to. Rachel doesn't have to anymore." Silence stretched like a thread. Frank broke it with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Glad to know marrying you comes with a benefits package." Chase laughed too loud too quickly. Rachel kicked her fiancé under the table. Frank caught it. After dinner, Rachel excused herself to take a call from one of her students' parents. Frank cleared the plates while Chase wandered to the living room, eyeing the framed photographs. "You've got quite a history here," Chase said, picking up a photo of Frank holding baby Rachel at the county fair. Frank dried his hands. "That was her first pony ride." "Cute," Chase replied. Then, almost to himself, "These old houses must be a pain to maintain." Frank stepped into the room. "They hold their value." Chase turned to him, serious for the first time. Look, Mr. Delaney, I know I'm not what you expected, but I love your daughter. I'm building a future she can be proud of. Frank studied him. Let me tell you something, son. I don't care how big your bank account is. What I care about is whether you see my daughter as an equal or as a rescue project. Chase stiffened. With all due respect, Sir, Rachel deserves more than what she's had, and I'm the man to give it to her. Frank's voice was soft but firm. If you loved her, you'd already know she has more than most where it counts. Rachel re-entered, then smiling, oblivious. Sorry, PTA drama. Ready for dessert? Frank nodded. Sure, let's wrap this up. That night after they left, Frank sat in the kitchen with the lights off, just the soft hum of the fridge and the ticking wall clock. He replayed the evening like a football coach breaking down film. Every word, every gesture. He didn't hate the boy. He pitied him. He could see what Chase didn't, that love built on superiority would always rot from the inside. Frank poured himself a finger of bourbon, the bottle he only brought out on holidays, and stood by the window. Outside, Rachel waved from the passenger seat of Chase's Tesla as they drove off into the perfect curated night. Elaine's photo sat on the bookshelf watching. Frank raised his glass to her. We got work to do. Frank sat at the kitchen table long after the sun had gone down. A cold cup of coffee untouched beside him. The soft tick of the wall clock, the only sound in the house. The pot roast smell had long faded, replaced now by the scent of quiet regret. The dinner with Chase had confirmed everything his gut had whispered the moment he heard that last name. Aldridge. Still, Rachel had looked so happy, too happy to hear the truth. And Frank, for all his quiet wisdom, had never found the right words to destroy a daughter's fairy tale gently. He picked up the cordless phone. Yes, he still used one, and stared at the numbers. Her number was burned into memory. He dialed once, hung up, tried again, stopped halfway. Coward, he thought, or just a father who's tired of breaking hearts. He got up, walked to the back room, the one Rachel wasn't allowed in as a child, and opened the old cabinet. Behind it, a safe. Inside things, no one in Greenville suspected signed contracts, corporate seals, stock certificates, and a Rolex he hadn't worn since Elaine died. Delaney Holdings still thrived, operating quietly under other names, other hands. Frank's hands behind the curtain. He pulled out a manila folder marked Aldridge Development Group 2017 Acquisition. That was the first time they'd crossed. The Aldridges had tried to squeeze out a small construction firm near Charleston, dirty tricks, late payments, manipulated inspections. Frank had stepped in, bought the firm anonymously, and flipped the tables without ever showing his face. They never knew who had pulled the rug out from under them, and now, years later, their golden boy was marrying his daughter. Frank sat back down, folder in hand, heart heavy. He thought of Elaine. She would have told him to wait, to observe, to let the truth come out through light, not fire. He closed the folder and stared out the window. Maybe she was right. The next morning, Frank rose before dawn, shaved and dressed in a clean button-up and slacks. The sun hadn't crested over the horizon yet, but he had already made his decision. He would not reveal the truth, not yet. Instead, he would play the part he'd been assigned. Poor, retired, unimportant. Because sometimes the invisible man sees the most. He called Rachel around 7:30. She answered sleepily. Dad. Everything okay? I wanted to say, I'm sorry, he said. She blinked in silence. I let my past shape my view of your future, he continued. That wasn't fair to you or to Chase. Rachel exhaled. That means a lot, Dad. Really, Frank smiled softly. I'd like another dinner. Just you this time. No talk of weddings or wealth. Just us. Deal, she said. Next Tuesday, perfect. He hung up and sat back staring at the phone. Later that day, Frank visited the hardware store downtown. He needed nothing. Just wanted the familiarity of routine, of men talking about roofing and plumbing and weather, like it all still mattered. Hey, Frank, said Bill from aisle 4. You hear about that new development project out near Anderson? Frank nodded. Aldridge Group. Yeah, Bill said. Big money, lot of promises. Frank kept his expression neutral. Hope they keep him this time. He bought a bag of screws he didn't need and left, but his mind was working. That night he opened a locked drawer in his desk and pulled out a thin black notebook, one with no label, no branding. Inside were handwritten notes, names, dates, values. It wasn't for business. It was a moral ledger. In it, he tracked not just money, but people, those who built others up and those who tore others down. He turned to a fresh page. Chase Aldridge, dismissive at dinner, sees Rachel as a project, polite only when beneficial. Arrogance shows under pressure. He paused, then wrote, "No humility." He closed the notebook. In the days that followed, Frank kept up appearances. He answered calls from Rachel, accepted updates on wedding venues and floral colors, even pretended to care when she read off the names of napkin patterns. But inside, the weight grew heavier, not from secrets, from inaction, from watching a child walk toward a mistake she couldn't yet see, and from knowing she had to see it herself. The morning of the wedding came with fog, a thick, pale mist that clung to the sidewalks like hesitation. Frank stood at the window, buttoning the cuffs of his one good dress shirt. The suit was old. Not worn out, just honest. No designer label, no sharp cut, just a simple charcoal gray that Elaine had once picked for a church fundraiser. He checked his tie twice. He looked fine. That would have to be enough. Trinity Grace Chapel in downtown Greenville was unrecognizable beneath the flood of white roses and shimmering silver sashes. Ushers in matching suits handed out programs. Someone offered Frank a mint. Another asked him to park farther down the block. He found his seat near the back. The bride's father. In the back. No one asked. No one cared. Not the Aldridges, not the planner, not even Rachel, who was tucked away in the bride's room, likely surrounded by makeup artists and stylists and laughter. Frank sat quietly, dignified. When Rachel finally appeared, the crowd rose in awe. She was radiant, the kind of beauty that came not from dresses or makeup, but from heart. Her eyes searched the crowd. For a split second, they met Frank's. He smiled. She smiled back, and for that moment, everything else fell away. The ceremony passed in a blur. Vows were said, rings exchanged, applause thundered. At the reception, champagne flowed like water. The ballroom sparkled with gold accents and soft jazz. Frank stood alone near the bar, sipping ginger ale. Chase worked the room like a politician, charming, laughing, perfect. His parents. Victoria and Edward Aldridge were late to arrive, but grand when they did. Victoria in navy silk, Edward in classic black tie. When Victoria spotted Frank, her brow furrowed. Recognition danced behind her eyes. Later during the toasts, Chase took the mic. "I want to thank my beautiful wife, my parents, and of course, Rachel's father, Mr. Frank Delaney. Thank you for your humble presence here tonight." Polite laughter, nothing too loud. Frank smiled mildly. Chase wasn't done. It takes a strong man to raise a daughter alone, especially with limited means. More laughter, sharper this time. Frank's jaw tightened, and yet here she is, radiant, accomplished, finally stepping into a life where she won't have to worry about secondhand shoes or microwaving yesterday's pot roast. There was a hush, brief but undeniable. Rachel's smile faltered. Victoria's eyes locked onto Frank again, this time wide with realization. She stood. "Excuse me," she said aloud, walking across the dance floor in her heels. She stopped inches from Frank. "You're not that Delaney, are you?" Frank set his glass down gently. "Which one do you mean?" She stared. "You bought out our commercial strip in Charleston, the one we tried to hide under shell companies. You took it quietly, ruthlessly." Chase laughed nervously. "Mom, what are you?" Frank stood. "I didn't take anything. I protected small business owners you tried to bankrupt." Gasps fluttered like birds escaping a cage. Someone whispered, "Wait." Delaney Holdings. Rachel's mouth dropped slightly. "Dad." Frank turned to her. "I didn't tell you because it didn't matter. Who I am on paper isn't who I am to you, or shouldn't be." Chase stepped forward, face flushed. "You lied. You let me think you were just some washed-up nobody." Frank met his eyes, calm and steady. "And look how you treated me." The room froze. No violin played, no applause followed, just silence. Victoria looked like she'd seen a ghost. Edward began quietly backing toward the exit. Rachel stepped down from the sweetheart table, dress rustling. "You're that Delaney," she whispered. Frank's voice softened. "Still your father, still the man who made pot roast and fixed your school projects at 2 a.m. But why? To see what he saw when he thought no one important was watching." Chase turned angry now. "You set me up." Frank shook his head. "No, son, you set yourself up." And with that, he buttoned his coat and walked out. Not storming, not making a scene. Just leaving. As he passed the stunned crowd, he heard murmurs rise, self-made. Powerful. He never said a word, but none of it mattered. Only Rachel's voice behind him did. Dad, wait. He paused, turned slightly. She stood there halfway between the man she married and the man who raised her. I don't know what to think right now. Frank nodded. Then don't. Just feel. You'll know soon enough. And he left her to figure it out, on her own. The sound of broken glass echoed louder than any applause that night. Chase's champagne flute shattered across the marble floor. Sharp edges glinting beneath the chandelier, as if even the glass couldn't bear the weight of what had just been said. Frank Delaney. The name alone turned heads, silenced laughter, and scattered conversations like wind through dry leaves. Rachel stood frozen beside the sweetheart table, one hand gripping the lace of her dress, the other limp at her side. Victoria Aldridge looked like someone had slapped her with a ledger, all numbers and consequences, no time for sentiment. Her husband Edward had already retreated behind a curtain near the hallway making calls. Always calls. Frank hadn't moved. He just stood there, calm as a man who'd come to church, not a war. Is this some kind of joke? Chase barked, voice cracking. You're telling me that you're the Delaney who Frank nodded once, the one who owns that ghost corporation that swallowed half of Aldridge DevCorp. Not a ghost, Frank said evenly. Just quiet. People began pulling out their phones, fingers tapping fast. A ripple of whispered, "Oh my God," followed. Net worth over $800 million, founder of Delaney Holdings, operates under shell firms, refused every Forbes interview, a ghost tycoon. Rachel stared at her father like she didn't recognize the man in front of her. You lied to me, she whispered. Frank turned to her, his face gentle. I never lied, he said. I just never told you the part that didn't matter. But it does matter, she said, voice cracking. You let me believe we were barely getting by, that you were scraping by on retirement checks. And what would have changed if I hadn't, Frank asked. Would we have eaten better? Slept better, loved better. Rachel blinked. Frank stepped forward slowly. I wanted you to grow up knowing the value of decency before the power of money. And you did. You became someone strong, someone kind. That was always your mother's dream. Rachel's eyes softened at the mention of Elaine. But Chase wasn't done. You manipulated this entire thing, he snapped. You let me think you were just some old-school working-class nobody so you could test me? Frank turned quietly. No, he said. I let you think whatever you wanted to. Chase's face turned red. You're a con man, he spat. You tricked me. Frank tilted his head. I gave you dinner. You gave me disdain. You baited me. I opened my door. You judged my furniture. You set me up to fail. No, Frank said, voice cool as stone. You just failed. Guests murmured louder now. One woman stood, clutched her purse. A man near the corners muttered, This is better than Netflix. Victoria looked like she was about to faint. You mean to tell me this entire time you were watching us? Judging us? No, Frank said. I was watching how you treated people you thought were beneath you. He turned to Rachel once more. I didn't come here to ruin your wedding. I came here hoping I was wrong about him. Rachel's lips quivered. Why didn't you just tell me? Frank looked her in the eyes. Because I needed to know if you loved him or the idea of what he offered. Chase, now sweating, reached for Rachel's hand. Rachel, baby? Listen, none of this changes how I feel about you. He's just trying to turn you against me. He's bitter, old, jealous. Frank said nothing. Chase pressed on. Look at me. I've been honest with you. I've loved you. I've given you everything. You gave me a version of yourself that only existed when you thought you were better than everyone in the room, Rachel said quietly. Chase froze. Rachel looked down then at her father. You were right, she said. I didn't want to be. Frank replied. Victoria moved closer to her son. We'll fix this, she muttered. We'll spin it. Say it was an act of sabotage. Maybe he hacked something. No, Rachel cut in. There's nothing to spin. She turned toward the crowd, shoulders squaring. I want to thank everyone for coming. The wedding happened, but the marriage, that's a conversation for tomorrow. And just like that, applause broke out. Not loud, not celebratory, but respectful, earned. Chase looked around, helpless now. Please, he said to no one in particular. You all know who I am. And that was the problem. They did. And now they knew who Frank was too. Frank nodded politely to the crowd and turned toward the exit. He didn't slam the door. Didn't drop a mic. He just walked. Outside, the night was cooler than it had any right to be. Fall had arrived early, as if it too wanted a fresh start. Frank stood at the edge of the parking lot, watching as the lights from the reception flickered through the windows like echoes of a story finally ending. A familiar voice came behind him. "Dad." He turned. Rachel stood there, arms folded, eyes full of everything she couldn't yet say. "I don't know where we go from here." Frank smiled softly. "That's the best place to start." Frank sat on the back porch with a mug of black coffee and the kind of silence that only comes after everything breaks. The wedding was 3 days past. The phone hadn't rung. No texts, no apologies, no explanations, just peace. The leaves had begun to change deep orange, soft red, golden brown, as if even the trees knew that something old had ended and something honest had begun. He didn't regret walking away. Not the reveal. Not the silence before it. Not even the years of pretending to be someone smaller than he was. He'd done it for Elaine and for Rachel. Because character wasn't built through speeches or inheritances. It was built in kitchens, in car rides, in late-night tears over a lost school election. And sometimes the best way to protect someone was to let them get hurt just enough to feel the bruise before the break. Frank walked back inside, poured another cup and glanced at the photograph on the wall. Elaine, smiling on their front porch 20 years younger, in that faded Brave sweatshirt she wore every fall. He spoke to her sometimes, not out loud, but in that quiet way people who've loved deeply understand. "She's stronger than I thought," he murmured, "but maybe not strong enough to leave him. Not yet." That afternoon he checked the mailbox. A single envelope, no return address, inside a note, handwritten. "I don't know if I was in love. I just know I wanted it to feel real. Dinner next week. Just us or." He smiled, not because it was hopeful, but because it was honest. The next Tuesday, Rachel pulled up in her old Toyota, the same one she'd driven since grad school. No Tesla, no designer bags, just her. They ate pot roast again. Same recipe. No wine this time. Just water and slow conversation. She told him she wasn't sure if the marriage would last. He told her that love wasn't supposed to feel like debt. They didn't talk about money or business or who was right. They just talked, like father and daughter, like equals. After she left, Frank returned to the porch. The stars were bright that night, unbothered by headlines or rumors or secrets. He sipped the last of his coffee and whispered to the wind, "She's starting to see Elaine." And this time he didn't sound sad. He sounded free. If you like this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left. Thank you for watching.